Mr. Speaker, the elephant in the room that has been ignored by the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party is simply two words: Chris Carter. You see, the members opposite want to sort of pretend that the dramatic political events that unfolded in this Parliament last Thursday simply didn't happen, and I challenge the next Speaker for the Labour Party to front up, it's Mr Cunliffe, to talk about the elephant in the room and Chris Carter. You see, this debate is about Budget 2010, the most visionary budget that members of this House have seen in a decade, a budget that addresses the challenges that are facing New Zealand with respect to our economy. And in contrast, we have the unfolding mess that was the Labour opposition. They're so more focused on the scraps amongst themselves than they are on the real issues that are facing New Zealanders. It is at all unbelievable that we have a situation where Mother Helen Clark and Dad Michael Cullen have left the Labour House and the children are running riot. They are a leadership opposition, a leaderless opposition, and members on this side of the House simply point out the contrast. I just raise a simple issue. Can we believe the Phil Goss pronouncements on policy? He said on the 20th of July, over trading the fourth week of holiday, and I quote, he said, "I'm quite relaxed about that, as long as there are safeguards to ensure that the employer can't abuse it." Well, the interesting thing is, 2 days later, the President of the Labour Party, a Mr Andrew Little, not an elected member of this House, not an elected representative, said no, the policy is that there will be no tradability of the fourth week of annual leave under Labour Party policy. And so the question I have is, who's writing the Labour Party's policy? Leadership has left this Parliament, is now in the hands of a union leader, and that exposes just the depth of mess that there is within that opposition. Let me just remind members opposite of the legacy that they left New Zealand in terms of our economy. Over the 9 years that they were in government, the debt of this country grew from $90 billion to $180 billion. We have a situation, and Mr Cunliffe opposite is interjecting. What he knows is that consumption expenditure was out of control. But let me point out, even more importantly, is this. Over the period from 2002, not one new job was created in the productive export part of the economy, and Mr Cunliffe knows that that is true. Take the period, the last 3 years of the government, of the previous government, and in each one of those years, economic growth was less than 1%. I faced the very first cabinet meeting of this new government when the Treasury advised us that Labour's legacy was a decade of deficits. Every single projected year from 2008 to 2018 had this country churning up additional debt. And what we have had to confront are those basic economic problems with a growth strategy. And I want to go through each of the 6 key elements of this government's plan to lift our country's economic performance. And the first of those, contained in the budget and the appropriations that we're debating, is tax reform. The most comprehensive tax reform that New Zealand has had for more than 2 decades. More than 2 decades. Changing, the member, David Cunliffe says, wimped out. Well, I have a challenge for Mr Cunliffe. What would he do?
Fix LAQC.
We've got some Labor policy. Now, my question for Mr Cunliffe, has Mr Little signed off on that policy? Has Mr Little signed off on the latest piece of policy that we've heard from Mr Cunliffe? I suspect not, but I suspect that Mr Cunliffe will be building a chummy relationship with Mr Little as the months of speculation over Labour's leadership go on. What we see in this budget package is a tax changes that will help drive economic reform. Now, we have Moana Maki chipping in about ACC. Well, let's look at Labour's record on ACC. Within days of being appointed as Minister, Moana Maki, I was called into an urgent briefing because of the mess that members opposite left in ACC, a debt of $2.4 billion in the second to last year of Labor, and a $4.8 billion loss just in ACC in their last year in government. Financially absolutely reckless, and one of the reasons that the people of New Zealand will not trust that government with the Treasury benches. So tax reform is at the heart of the 2010 budget. The second major element, regulatory reform. Regulatory reform with the RMA, both a phase 1 and a phase 2. And, well, Mr Cunliffe says it's not going to change the world. Well, I put this to Mr Cunliffe. What did Labor do in their last year when 27,000 resource consents were not processed in the statutory timeframe? What did they do? Zip. In fact, it got worse in every single year that Labor was in government. What did they do about the prolonged and protracted legal disputes over getting resource consents for new infrastructure? If you ever want to see a disaster of Labor's record, it's the Wellington motorway and the decades it took for its consent. Equally so, Mr Chairman, a third key element of this government's program is the $320 million commitment in this year's budget to research, to development and innovation. Because if we are to grow the economy, if we are to close the gap with Australia, investing in our scientists, investing in innovation has got to be a key part of the program. And equally so, this government's been committed to constraining the growth in the public sector. How many members opposite really in their heart of hearts believe it's okay to have the public sector grow by 50%, huge growth in the public sector, at the same time the economy grew by just 10%? Absolutely unsustainable, and that is why today the government has announced a further important piece of work around ensuring value for money for the taxpayer in those key areas of public sector policy advice. Oh, well, the members opposite shout cuts. Well, I have to say to them this. They believe in a bloated, expanded public service, an unproductive public service, a public service that grows at a huge rate. Because the truth is, Labor members can care more about navel-gazing in Wellington than what they do about real services for New Zealanders. And then, of course, there's the huge program that Anne Tolley and Stephen Joyce is investing in skills development and better standards in education, and, of course, the program around infrastructure investment. And I've got a simple response to Annette King in terms of her challenge around changing the gap. When will the tax policy that this government's introduced come into effect? The 1st of October. When are the resource management changes that we passed last year coming into effect? Only yesterday. When is the infrastructure that we've invested in, when is that going to start paying a dividend in terms of growth? The truth is these are long-term policies that are going to pay rich dividends for